let me start recording just so we can get some of these great things that you're saying about Born the Battle on record.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's a small crew, but we do what we can.
Absolutely. We're big fans. I personally am a big fan of the VA to begin with. It's the only one I have, so I cherish and love it as much as possible.
Yeah.
So any way to like help broaden the reach of these stories you're doing is absolutely in line with our charter.
Yeah, we really appreciate the fact that you syndicate a lot of the information, because at the end of the day, we just care about the information getting out.
Right.
Mark, it's been over a year, man. Last time I saw you was at the 2019 Military Influencer Conference, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And you guys were having a viewing for the movie The Last Full Measure.
Yes.
Gotta tell you my personal story on that. I didn't know what that movie was at the time that you guys were helping promote that. And I thought it was like a student film at the conference or something. And I was like, okay, I probably skipped that. And then Augie came over for wherever I was, and he was like, hey, can you guys watch this film? It's pretty, and we were like, fine, whatever. And we walked in towards the end, I guess what you would call the culminating scene. And we were like, oh my God, this is Samuel L. Jackson. This is,
yeah.
We were like, what did we miss?
That movie, if you came in at the end of it, that is a real tearjerker. The very end of it makes me so proud to be in the Air Force. Actually, the way they shot that final sequence. So you came in at the right time, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I came in there and I saw that scene and I was like, oh my God, well, I got to see the rest of this film. So we went into another viewing at the Air Force conference later on, some weeks down the line. But no, that was kind of my introduction to the We Are the Mighty staff, other than Blake, who you and I both know.
Right.
Real quick, Blake was my TA up at Syracuse, and that's how I knew Blake Stillwell.
Blake and I served together
over at First Combat Camera.
Yes.
Okay. What was he? You were the wing. You were the commander there, the flight commander there. What was he? Just one of your troops?
Well, I wouldn't say he was just one of my troops. I would say he was like one of the most amazing troops that we had there. I was there at a very, I think, special time frame where some really incredible people came out so like Blake was there. He was the youngest. He was the youngest videographer we ever had. He was also the one that was trying, I think, the hardest to prove himself, and he was very gifted. We did a lot of great projects together. Yeah. You have your like Stacy Pearsalls of the world, who have gone on to do incredible things in the military community. JT Locke, highly celebrated photographer. I mean, I was there when all the rock stars were there. It's pretty great.
Yes, and I do want to get into that. I definitely want to get into that. But first, I want to go back a little bit further. I want to go back to the first time, and this is the first question that we ask everyone on Born the Battle. The first time that you knew that the military was the next step. When and where was that for you?
Gosh, I am embarrassed to admit this out loud, but I went into the military kicking and screaming. So I was getting ready for college. My parents had just divorced. My father was an Army Green Beret Airborne Ranger. He was, the cream of the crop, Special Forces.
Yeah.
And so much to the fact that growing up, we used to listen to Army Ranger cadences on cassette tape as we would drive around town.
Oh, he was moto.
Oh, so moto. It was very impressive to grow up in that kind of environment. But also, it didn't feel like it was for me at all.
Probably a little intimidating to have someone so moto, and then
yeah. Yeah. So it's time to like apply for college, et cetera. And again, they just separated. My father sits me down, and his version of motivating me into college was, it's time for you to become a man. You need to cut your hair. You look absurd. And you need to fill out all these ROTC scholarships so you can go to school. Because we're not going to pay for this. Like, ouch. Okay. My mother had a little bit more of a gentler approach, encouraging me to consider an ROTC scholarship to pay for school, because we had, I have a brother and a sister, and by offsetting that cost, we were giving them, a better leg up and more opportunities. So I applied for all of them. Ended up getting an Air Force scholarship, and they dictated where I went to school. which was RPI in upstate New York, in Troy. And it's actually where I wanted to go to school, but it's weird getting a letter in the mail saying, here's the school you're going to, here is your major. And me being unfamiliar with what that was at the time, it was called computer systems engineering. To this date, I still don't know what that is.
They gave that to you? Like they gave you the this is
Yeah.
what you're going to make? Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't always go like that. But so the Air Force had a very specific need for communications officers at the time. And that was exactly with the track that they wanted me to go on. So if I was going to take the money, here's the school I was going to go to, and here's the degree I was going to have. And that was a bit intimidating, if I'm being honest. And I showed up to ROTC, and it's a bunch of military stuff that I was absolutely not interested in. And I kind of pulled away from that. And what was fascinating about this whole thing is I slowly realized as the years were going by that, oh my God, I'm about to actually be in the military. I better change my attitude about all this. And I had been, but I talked about having a technical degree. I moved from that computer systems engineering over to computer science, and then I had a dual major in a budding program there that was essentially digital media. It was animation and it was film production. And so the Air Force didn't care if I had a dual major. And there's a reason why I'm outlining this. I started making videos nonstop, to fill my requirements at school. But I loved it. I loved creating content.
Yeah.
And I started doing it for Detachment in 550, which was the RTC detachment there for the Air Force. I made a recruiting video. I made a whole bunch of morale videos, which is just kind of code for just making fun of other people that are you're in the cadet corps with. And a staff sergeant who was assigned there pulled me aside, and he said, it was actually the day I got commissioned. He pulled me aside and he's like, LT, I've been watching you essentially drag your feet alongside your fellow cadets here, but I have to tell you, where you really shine is this telling the stories and highlighting what we're doing in the military. And you will find that in the military. You just have to look. It's there. I promise you. And he was right. And you found this as well, a combat camera.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I was able to find my way in there. So anyway, I got into the Air Force.
What year was this?
This was 2001. This was 8 months before 9/11.
Oh, wow.
So I go in and they roll out the red carpet for you when you get to the Air Force. And by that I mean it's very accommodating. There's a very defined set of things you have to go do and checklists. And I reported into the squadron. And I was like, you know what? I don't know.
Sounds pretty different than boot camp.
Yeah. Well, so I did our version of that. I did that between my sophomore and junior year. So gotcha. Yes, I did get to live that experience. And that's actually when I started to be like, oh, okay, I like this a lot more than I thought it was. And gotcha. Then my first job in the Air Force, I worked for a deployed communications squadron. And I really was starting to dig it. They sent me away to communications training. I came back. I'm literally about to go into my first day of work as like a bona fide communications officer, and the towers come down, and the world changed. And it went from, oh wow, I'm in the military, this is actually kind of cool, to, oh wow, I am in the military, we are about to go to war. And what's crazy about my first assignment is that we were, with the pilots, the first people out the door. And a deployed communications officer basically goes with a small team to set up the communications to then build a base. You'd be dropped in the middle of nowhere to start landing planes and start creating the infrastructure that would be bases. So September 12th, half my squadron deployed. They were out the door. They were over. Wow. They went over to Qatar. And they would then forward deploy from there to start setting up the infrastructure that would be the beginning of all of, OIF, OEF, et cetera.
So where was the starting point? Pretty much from Qatar to Kuwait, from Kuwait to...
Yeah.
Wow.
And I didn't even know half the places that they were kind of staging and going, because it was all very much classified at the time.
Yeah. So you weren't in combat camera then. You were in comms, setting up great towers and satellites and stuff like
That's
that.
what you would think. What's amazing and started my journey over to combat camera is, I'm listening to those words of that incredible sergeant who pulled me aside, and I start to do things where I'm trying to apply this like creativity. And so half the squadron's gone, and a general came in to come see the rest of the deployed force. And there was a presentation being given. And I remember going up to my boss saying, "Hey, can I put like a little animation in the beginning of this presentation?" And he was like, "No, no, absolutely not. Like, what do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well, I just
This
want
is
to put
PowerPoint,
like,
son.
yeah, this is PowerPoint. This is also 2001 PowerPoint." So I was like,
Yeah.
"No, just something like cool to like welcome the general." And he said, I could tell that he was like, "If I just let him do this, I can just delete it and he can go away." And so I did. And this is kind of crazy to say, but I had to program in PowerPoint an animation that I built in Flash, brought in. And when I say program, I had to tell the program how to like start and stop on the frame and where to loop and animate,
Oh,
et cetera.
wow.
And I animated an eagle flying onto the screen, grabbing a lightning bolt, a globe forming around him, and the shield building with like an eagle scream and a lightning flash. It probably sounds way more impressive than it is. I can send you a link to it.
It's funny how you're talking about programming it, but nowadays it's something that you can create in After Effects in like, half a day,
Oh yeah.
quarter of a
Oh
day.
yeah.
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 That's amazing.
And so I built this, and he didn't even see it when I gave it back to him, because you had to, it was something you like had to like deliberately click through when you were in live mode. So he's like, "All right, you didn't really do anything. I just see a blue screen. Great. We'll just go right on." So he hits play. This animation happens in front of 300 people in this auditorium. And the general says, "Who did that?" And the whole room like turns around looking for who did do that. And I'm in the very back. I raise my hand, and he says, "Come see me after this." So the present, the whole presentation goes. I go and see this general after the fact, and
Now, when you said that, what was in your mind?
I was like, "Oh, this is awesome. I don't know what's going to happen, but this has got to be cool." My boss was now terrified, and my boss's boss was like,
Yeah.
I have to chaperone this. Like, what is happening? What is going on with this lieutenant?
You're like, "This is cool." They're like, "Oh no, son, you have no idea. This might not be cool."
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you know what's funny is like many years later, this general would see me and call me out in the middle of a giant auditorium again. It was so great. So I show up, and he's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm Lieutenant Mark Harper. Just got here, part of the Air Mobility Operations Squadron." He's like, "I don't think you should be doing that. I think you should be doing what you just did. You should be in the training department here and work on videos." And the colonel was like, "Yes, that's exactly what we were thinking. Let's send him there." So I ended up getting a dual role where I would go out and deploy and run small teams for exercises predominantly. And then I also worked on training videos, but the training videos never actually happened. What did happen is a lot of like morale videos, and these morale videos would get played in front of like dining outs, dining ins, and like change of command ceremonies. So I would basically be asked to put together a video making fun of whatever was happening as like the morale component of it. And I kind of became like infamous to some degree, because you didn't want to end up on my radar to get made fun of in one of these like Harper productions. And it finally, like, the same colonel was like, "You really should be over at combat camera." And I'm like, "What's a combat camera? That sounds exactly what I should be doing."
What's a combat camera?
Yeah. And so I did get sent over in 2004. I showed up to combat camera. Blake had like shown up just weeks before that. Very, very quiet individual, but had already started like making waves as being like known as like a pretty solid editor for a couple weeks into the job. And I was the only officer at combat camera in like the longest time, since they actually like had a combat camera officer function years before that. They killed and just said, "You know what? This is a position that's supposed to be just managed."
Administrative and
Exactly.
But you were actually producing stuff.
I was producing stuff, and we all were as officers, but never providing any creative input. And I remember on like week 3 there, I had a couple of troops come in, and some of them had like known that I had a background in video, and some of them knew that I actually had like made projects myself. And so there was a little bit of street cred, but not a lot of street cred coming from the enlisted corps for an officer that's like brand new coming in who hasn't done anything. And so this one guy comes in, he's a master sergeant. And you could tell like he was trying to get his troops out of work that day. And so he comes in and I can see that everyone's behind him and they're like, sir, the Avid is down. We can't connect some of the drives, so we're not going to be able to edit today. And I was like, oh, that happens to be my specialty. I can reconnect those in about 2 seconds. Let me add it. And then I could see all of their eyes like drop. And then the master sergeant was like, oh, that's right. You are the one that, okay, never mind. We'll get back to work. And I'm like, no. I hear you loud and clear. And if this were anyone else, you would have most likely gotten away with leaving early. So why don't I not buck the trend on this today? I'm not here to make waves to begin with anyway, but please do consider me as someone that you can't snowball in the future. And he was like, Roger that, sir. I had the best time of my life to this date, still working, being deployed, and being around such creative individuals. It was such an amazing, like real introduction to the rest of the military, working in like purple environments, working with the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps,
Yes.
And then the Air Force at large, and being deployed twice and actually having a global mission as part of like Combat Camera. The imagery we were taking would show up like the next day on like CNN and Fox. It was kind of insane to see imagery get cleared through your hands and then end up on like a national venue.
And this was a time when, you know, the communication freeway isn't what it is today. You know,
right.
to get image from a cave in Afghanistan to CNN, or it was a little bit of a different type of process than what it is now, especially video footage.
It was crazy, right? I mean, we didn't have internet in 2005 in Iraq. That wasn't a thing. We barely had telephones, right? So we were sending out photographers, videographers, and then maintenance crew that were setting up these like satellite terminals to feed back into Baghdad, go through our imagery management team, and then for us to send it back to Atlanta to Divids in DC as well. And you're right, that was a Herculean task. And the biggest job that we had to do was the 2005, the first official elections that Iraq had. Our job was to do one of two things. It was either to prove to the world that democracy was prevailing and to go out and vote. And here were all the now unclassified voting locations that were hidden really up until like the hours before for security reasons.
Wow.
Or the job was to tell the Iraqis, do not go and vote. You're going to get blown up. All eyes were on Combat Camera that day across the world. Just many people didn't know it. But when everyone woke up December 15th, 2005, to see all those purple fingers across all the news organizations, it's because of the hardworking men and women of Combat Camera and the entire Army system that was allowing us access to the polling sites. And then we're facilitating getting content all the way through that satellite sequence. So
now, amazing. you say Army, the Army infrastructure. Was it a joint Combat Camera at that time, or was it pretty much first Combat Camera that you were part of?
It was 76 people across Army, Navy, Air Force, with Air Force having the second largest footprint, but Air Force having the lion's share of the officers that would fill the billet to run it. So almost every single Combat Camera OIC was filled by an Air Force officer, and then there would be an Army lieutenant that was second in command. And that was very helpful because dealing with Army soldiers while deployed is not an easy task for an Air Force captain. That's for sure.
And especially from a Air Force captain from the famed first Combat Camera out in South Carolina. I say famed because you guys usually took all the military videographer award, or MILVIDs as we call them,
right?
Which are basically, for those that are listening, they're basically the Emmys or the Oscars of the DoD combat and public affairs community. It's an inter-service competition and all that. I gotta say it was after your time, but you know, I watched First Combat Camera take the lion's share of those awards, except for 2009 and 2010 when I snagged the best video editing category for 2 years straight.
Whoa!
Yep. And lately, there's been some Marines putting in work out there. I don't know if you saw any of Matthew Callahan's stuff. He just got out, but for the most part, He took the photographer and videographer in the same year.
That is so hard to do and incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. But for the most part, Air Force's first combat camera took most of the awards at those shows. Why do you think that was? Was it being placed in purple environments where they can get that imagery? Was it the training? What do you think? Was it just the talent that you guys had at the time?
So many things that came together. So one, the real embarrassing part of all of it is we had the most money, like hands down.
Yeah.
We had, Air Force Combat Camera had the most resourcing. So many people got to go to Syracuse. So many people had like the latest editing equipment, the latest camera. And because of that environment, we kind of grew, some, very talented, but also it also came with like this air of royalty to some degree, right? Because we were being asked for by name to show up and document things, and some generals would identify correctly that we could help make their exercise look sexy and help them get money for it next year by giving them this like incredible sizzle reel of what Cobra Gold was in 2005. Yeah. So we started to have like a pretty solid calling card. And with that came either a lot of support or a lot of animosity. But either way, we weren't fishing for work ever. So everything was inbound and based on task orders and based off of whatever the existing needs were. I mean, you most likely experienced this. Combat camera is a very misunderstood creature inside. And so often back in the day, we were separate from public affairs, and there was a definitive church and state difference between the two.
Absolutely.
Now it falls under public affairs, and I think it's kind of become more of a whitewashed term for, basically a combat photojournalist to some degree.
Yes.
But it's, we were very proud of the fact that we were not spinning any stories. That was for psychological operations to do. That was for public affairs to do. We were shooting the things that would end up on the History Channel someday. That was essentially what we were attempting to do.
Yes, it was a very delineated. We didn't. None of the imagery that we caught was influenced by anything other than what was right in front of us.
Right.
You're right. There was a lot of pride in that. We were more historical documentation. We let public affairs do what public affairs does. And PsyOps do what PsyOps does. But no, absolutely. It's a weird, Marine Corps calls it STRATCOM now. Is it pretty integrated together now with the Air Force?
So it all completely falls underneath public affairs. And I would probably argue that the mission is has mutated as such.
Yeah.
But like the Navy has dropped combat camera altogether at this point. So I would imagine that we're a dying breed in its purest form, but hopefully the tenets of the quality that we were bringing to that equation, plus the advances in technology, et cetera, are allowing public affairs to kind of maintain that same level of quality of imagery gathering and storytelling.
Do you think it's because of the way that the gear has pretty much, it's not as expensive to get in the game anymore as it used to be?
Yeah. So like in 2005, getting a task order to go into, not that we ever did this, but go into a mosque and document whether or not there was a weapons cache in there. It can now be done by a soldier with a GoPro.
Yeah.
Being inserted in very precarious places and having to bump someone off of, a stack of breaching a house is now all done much more safely by the trained professionals who are wearing GoPros in chest harnesses, et cetera. My entire job was trying to teach someone several ranks above me who had no time in the day to hear an Air Force guy asked to pull one of their trained warriors out of combat to insert a photographer. I would get laughed out of the room before it even began to start, and then they would get a call from the Pentagon, or I would be able to actually use my salesmanship to essentially explain to them why this was a good thing for the mission and good thing for the war effort as a whole. And ultimately, we always did get into the into the mission, but it was an uphill battle every single time, and it took a lot of Black Hawk trips from me flying to extremely remote places in Iraq to meet with someone, meet with a colonel to get participation authorization, and that was my full time job, being a sales guy.
Yeah, for me at my level, it was always starting out with the capabilities brief, and then if that didn't go, then I would look for a targeted opportunity because I didn't. It was me and a lieutenant that was public affairs. I was combat camera, and I still had to show that we did have a separate mission. And I remember in Romania, our CO was mad that when Russia invaded Ukraine, we were the closest unit to Crimea and to Kiev. And our CO was angry that we were the third option to evacuate Kiev. And we were the Black Sea Rotational Force. Technically we were there to train with other countries and things like that. But we also had a capability where we could actually do that. And he didn't know how to communicate that up to the combatant commander. And I was like, and see, that was my target of opportunity. It was just going, sir, I know you have to brief Congress when you get back. Let me make you a product. Let me make you a video. Let me make you a documentary that explains the whole special purpose MAGTF purpose, the real purpose for being out here. And from there, I was able to sell them. Next thing you know, I was all over Europe. So you're right. It takes a little bit of salesmanship to really get that mission across because not many people knew exactly what we did.
Yeah, absolutely. And it to the outside world, it can seem like it's a waste of resourcing if not understood correctly. People now, when I talk about being a combat camera, they look at me with a puzzled look and then say, I have an iPhone. Can I just do that job now instead? And I'm like, actually, to a degree, yes. But we did serve a very important purpose and still do.
Yes. So while you were in, Mark, give me either your best friend or your greatest mentor.
So greatest mentor, I would say, there's a guy by the name of Jim Fabio. He's a colonel now, still in the Air Force Reserves.
It's a great name.
It is.
Yeah,
it is. Actually, Jim has 2 Emmys.
Oh wow.
His real world job is a videographer and director, and he actually helps teach courses with Blake, Juan Femath, and some of the other combat camera crew that have now created that DC shoot off that happens once a year. But I remember Jim was the first combat camera adjutant commander, so he would come in to do his kind of reserve 2 weeks, week and a month, 2 weeks a year with combat camera as the alternate commander. And I remember I was creating an animation that was going to be the beginning of this exercise we were doing, and it was a really dumb, goofy animation about why we all had to get in the back of C-130 and get flown to the middle of this exercise. And I was animating in Flash. I was making fun of people in the squadron, doing this Terrence and Phillips style animation, explaining that these terrorists had come and they were launching missiles at this field. We had to go and survey what was happening and set up a camp, etc.
Man, you seem like a fun LT. I'm just got to say, I never had a LT like that.
I like to think so. For the most part, I think it was. I did learn a lot about leadership, etc. over that time frame. But yeah. Jim was sitting next to me, and he says, "Hey, you're really good at this." And I look at him like, "I'm really good at what? Making really dumb cartoons?" I think you're right as well. And he said, No, you could get paid to do this. You should get paid to do things like this." And I'm like, "I do get paid to do things like this. I'm on the clock right now." And he said, there's not a lot of people, and especially from the officer side, who can actually create. And you're a creator and not an imitator. I don't know why that stuck with me, but it was part of the calculus for why I would eventually leave the military. And Jim and I stay in touch now. We actually have hired him to do work at We Are the Mighty on occasion too, and he's done fabulous things for us.
Now, you got out in 2007, right?
Correct.
Was that right before the Great Recession, or was that during?
That would be, I think, moments before, but it was during that. It was during that time frame where I think David Tenenbaum had mentioned it to you. They were doing a reduction in forces, and voluntary separation pay came out. So the first time ever, the Air Force was paying very specific career fields and time and grade to take a multiplier of their time in service as a severance pay to leave.
Oh yeah.
And I, I'm not kidding you. The night before, I was juggling some things. As an officer, you can't stay in any particular job for more than 3 to 5 years at this point. And I had just hit 4 and gotten my next assignment to go back and become a traditional communications officer again. Maybe go run a land shop somewhere and help security for a base. And that sounded like a death sentence for me. And
Yeah.
I had just come back from my second deployment and was really starting to think, like, is there a chance I could just go to Los Angeles and see what happens out there? I need a sign. Someone give me a sign of what to do. And an email hit my inbox and it said, volunteer separation pay for communications officers between 4 and 8 years. It basically said, Mark Harper, have we got a deal for you? And I showed up to work the next morning and the commander pulled all of us in and said, I know you all got that email last night. I'm here to tell you that none of you need to take that. And I shoot my hand up and I go, ma'am, I have already filled out the application. I just need you to sign it. And she shot me this look of like just absolute disdain. And she pulls me aside and she said, you know what? You don't see this right now, but I see it very clear. The Air Force is going to lose all of its best because they're getting paid to leave right now. And we're going to be kind of in a situation in like 10 years where we're missing some real, and I'm like, this sounds like a you problem, ma'am, and not a me problem. I'm out.
She's looking at the 10,000-foot view and she's like, don't ruin this for me. And you were like, nope, sorry, already done.
Oh, crazy. Yeah. So crazy. But
your next assignment though, it doesn't sound, from a creative mind, you're right. It sounds like a death sentence.
Yeah, it was. So the best thing the Air Force ever did for me was allow me to serve in combat camera. It's also the worst thing the Air Force did for itself because I had, been to the top, as it were.
Yeah, but they got the most out of you for what your skill set was and what your passion was, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think a lot of people, maybe sometimes they stick in a little bit too long or but I think everyone kind of knows. They get this feeling of, you know what, now's the time.
Absolutely.
Now's the time. And you have to listen to that, and no matter what, whether you do 4 years or you do 30 years, eventually you do have to put up the uniform and you got to decide what's the best way to transition from what I'm doing right now. And it sounds like this helped you with that.
It did, but it was also absolutely a terrifying thing to do, to just kind of blindly move to Los Angeles. One of the people I deployed with, was actually a reservist combat camera officer as well. Yeah. And I remember him coming in to work one day and he was like, you really like this? And I'm like, yeah, what do you mean? Yeah, we're a combat camera. I love this. This is great. I love every second of this. Yeah. And he said, yeah, this is more of just like a job for me, but you should move to Los Angeles. And I basically looked at him and I'm like, what's a little girl like me going to do in a big city like that? And he said, well, as fate would have it, I have an extra bedroom that you could rent, and that would be a great staging opportunity for you. And I have a couple of connections for you, so you could like kind of hit the ground running. And that combined with that email about voluntary separation pay just kind of locked it in and started my journey to Los Angeles as a whole.
So you went over there a little bit blind.
I did.
And that scares a lot of people. It doesn't scare me. I'll be honest. Maybe it's because we come from the same kind of creative background, but I totally moved to Seattle and before I got the email from NASCAR, I was totally going to buy a van and I was going to outfit it as an editing station and just go to Vancouver and just see what happened.
Oh, that's cool.
That was my first post-military plan before I started applying to jobs and one actually came in.
Amazing.
So no, your plan of going blindly to LA, I feel you on that.
Yeah. A lot of things happened during that time frame though, before the We Are the Mighty opportunity.
Yeah. You started in kind of in marketing and business development, like for some big names, Paramount Pictures, doing digital marketing campaigns for like the Transformers, G.I. Joe, and the Star Trek reboot. How did you transition into that line of work after service?
It's super hard to actually kind of connect the dots in that manner. But as you can imagine, anyone who would everyone was very interested in learning about who what Comet Camera was. And so anytime I would like reach out to somebody cold call, I'd say, "Hi, I just separated from the Air Force. I did something called Combat Camera." I would usually send over a couple of like Combat Camera photos from like the previous week, and no one had seen the war detailed like this because it didn't always get into the news that way.
Sure.
And so there's like these
Yeah.
beautiful shots of operations or wartime experiences, and that was a great door opener. And I was able to kind of to use this initial like network that I got from that individual, Hamilton Underwood is his name, and some initial introductions I actually got through Combat Camera. Actually, the fourth Combat Camera knew that I was coming out, and I had served with some of them. And I ended up on the first day in Los Angeles, I ended up getting a job interview at Fox to essentially go do like the behind the scenes stuff that would end up back in the day on DVDs.
Sure. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I went in, and this kind of funnels into the overarching Hollywood story. But I showed up, I went to this interview. They were like blown away about this experience, and they were like, we could absolutely see sending you to the set of 24, dealing with a drunk Kiefer Sutherland. You've dealt with, I'm sure, scarier people in your time frame. This is amazing for you. I'm like, this sounds amazing. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to do this. Here's the crazy thing that happened. The very next day, the writer's strike hit. And when the writer's strike hit in 2007, the entire Hollywood machine came screeching to a halt. And not only did that job disappear the next day, that entire department got absorbed, restructured, and let go. Like there was, without TV resuming in production, there was nothing to go and produce. And it hobbled like so many people's livelihoods. And so I was now joining Hollywood at the most inopportune time ever, as it was essentially coming to a halt.
Yeah.
And really having to fall back on, okay, well, technically I was, a version of a producer. Maybe there's something on the business side of the equation that I can jump into. I don't have I don't have scripts at my disposal. I've never had the opportunity to work in development, and I ended up taking, it's not really in my my LinkedIn past, but I ended up taking an internship at a production company for Gary Ross, the guy that made like Seabiscuit and Hunger Games.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there making photocopies of books and scripts, fetching coffee, picking up pizza, driving around the lot of Universal where we were located, and seeing the entertainment industry from the belly of the beast in development, where it's all like, it's a grind of reading scripts and setting the things you like up and trying to make those things turn into TV shows and movies. And I remember when they found out that I had this military background, people were coming up to apologize to me for asking me to like photocopy a book. And I'm like, please do not. I will be the best damn photocopier you've ever seen. I am hungry for this. And I get you have to pay your dues and learn the business from the inside out. So I'm ready to learn.
Real quick, how important was that humility?
So just having come from the military, we have to like pay your dues. I never thought I could skip really any steps going in. I thought that I at least had an interesting enough story to gain an audience to pitch myself to see what I could do.
Yeah.
But I never really had like a chip on my shoulder. Even to the point of like, sometimes I would hide that military background because it wasn't serving me a purpose in some of my early Hollywood days.
Yeah.
So it was a very challenging time. So I think people were still just very confused about the war in general at that time. And the anger from being at war transitioned to, well, we support the troops. It's not their decision to start wars. It's their decision to help defend the country after the fact. And so that movement kind of came around a few years later, but that was a hard thing to navigate in the very beginning.
Sure. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. You were talking about how you got from that, that first gig and then getting into Paramount.
So I ended up getting a great meeting to go meet with the head of Interactive. the interactive marketing department, and that was a very budding part of the marketing machine for Hollywood, as it were. This was when MySpace was still a big thing, and Facebook pages were just starting. So I ended up going to an interview. I'll never forget how this went down. I was like basically asked to meet the 3 creative directors there, and one of the creative directors, I walked into his office. It was the most fantastic, like comic filled movie paraphernalia office you've ever seen, with replicas of like Optimus Prime that were like 3 feet high in the room. And I'm just
wow.
like, this is the coolest office I've ever seen. He doesn't even look up. He doesn't even look up. He's wearing a hoodie and it's drawn over his eyes. His room is in complete like pitch dark. The shades are drawn. He says, yeah, it's a lot cooler than that suit you're wearing. Suit. And I'm like, I feel like I'm an Entourage being like accosted right now. And so I sit down in the chair in front of him because he's been asked to meet with me at this point by his boss, and he lightens up a little bit and he's like, "I'm messing with you. I really have an appreciation for the military, and let me tell you all the cool things that like I would do with the military and the people that like I've been kind of collecting in terms of just my own personal like outreach and sponsorship." And this guy's name is Mickey Capaferri, incredible human being. He ended up hiring me out of that interview because he learned about like all the animation stuff I did, and he's like, you could be like a real hands-on guy to help me work with the agencies to like fix things that take them too long and cost too much money. He's like, the first thing you're doing, you are going to build and manage the Optimus Prime MySpace page. And I'm like, wait, I'm Optimus Prime now? And he's like, you are Optimus Prime now. And some of your best friends are Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox and Bumblebee. And it was weird to be Optimus Prime for that time frame. But we were working on these digital marketing campaigns. And again, social media was so budding at the time. It was crazy to watch this unfold in real time.
So this was a MySpace page like of Optimus Prime, and you had to act like you were Optimus Prime.
Yes, I had 500,000 followers, and I basically had to like
that's awesome.
post updates. I had to make fun of Megatron, and basically talk about how great Autobots are.
Oh, that's great.
It was really when Facebook was on its way out, and it was when MySpace was on its way out, and as Facebook was starting to gain traction, but still had no ability to. You couldn't like buy likes at the time. So everything was organic. Same thing for MySpace. But it was under such a microphone because studios and Paramount was leaning far forward into it. We're starting to embrace digital as an alternative means to out of home, billboards or anything like broadcast commercial wise. So we were like trailblazing and trying to make a name for the micro content we were putting as kind of Easter eggs for the diehards out there that were very interested in the Transformer universe, etc.
And let them spread the word. Very good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now you did the same line of stuff for Technicolor for the animation and gaming department. How did that differ from Paramount? How did you make that transition over there?
So Paramount, like working at a studio is a fascinating and terrifying experience, and it's very thankless, although it's very cool.
Yeah.
And I was on a contract, and this was when the recession was hitting. So I was on a year contract. I was set against the budgets of a handful of films. I was being called on paper a military advisor, but these movies were all shot in the can and in final steps of post-production. Gotcha. I was more of like, we can take those funds and then divert them to what you're really doing, which is digital marketing.
Gotcha.
And so it ended up being that the recession was hitting, people were getting let go in mass. I was protected because I was already set against budgets of films that was already spent. But when that time frame came up, I was offered a job to stay, but and I was a part-time person there at Paramount, and that was the same time frame that I was at UCLA Anderson doing the Masters of Business Administration program.
Gotcha.
And they offered me a job, and I just looked at the job offer and I was like, I can't do this. This sets me back so many years. I looked at who my boss was going to be, and I said, would you take this if you were me? And she did her best job of like dancing around. And then ultimately she's like, no, you should not take this job. And I'm like, okay, great. We're agreed. I'll go back to being fun employed, go back to school and see what my next step is.
Yeah.
But Technicolor came shockingly kind of fast after that, um, through a connection. And again, something you're not taught in the military, at least back in the day, is there was no reason to do networking. There was no reason to like try to build your own brand and meet people and learn more about what others are doing and how you can help them and connecting the dots. So I just kind of had to do that out of necessity. And every interview or every meeting I got, I would just ask for three other people I could bug. And because I was a veteran and I had a cool story, usually the individual was happy to point me in the direction of somebody else, and that would start that train. So I ended up getting an interview with the person who was basically the global marketing officer for Technicolor. Technicolor, when I joined, was a 22,000 person company spread across the globe, and we really only know it in the U.S. as the post production company that helped create color film.
Yeah,
Wizard of Oz being the very first one. But outside of the U.S., Technicolor is the number one set-top box provider and a patent holder of about 40,000 patents at the time. So it was a real money-making machine outside that happened to also have this video production component across the entertainment spectrum. And so I got a chance to work for him. Name is Amadori. And because he was in charge of all of Technicolor, I got to see the 7 different divisions of the company and interact. And animation and gaming was in the very beginning of its stages. And I gravitated to it, and ultimately kind of
naturally, because you're doing Flash and whatnot.
Right. And I kind of moved my way into that department. And the first thing I said is, I was like, I'm from the marketing team. I'm like, we don't need marketing. We need people making stuff. And I'm like, well, as a matter of fact, I think one of the problems you guys have is like recruiting other animators in places like Bangalore, India. Let me go there. I will make you a recruiting video. And I think this is another one of those things where my boss was like, if I say yes, will you go away? And I'm like, yes. And so I did. I went away to Bangalore, India, and made them a very cool recruiting piece that they used to show like what's the environment, what's it like to be an animator at these kind of offshore locations. And it's actually a very, very cool thing that we were a part of at that time.
Interesting. That's super interesting. Now, I mean, you worked at Paramount, and there's a lot of people that you talk about that offer that you were given. There's a lot of people that would have taken that offer. Working at Technicolor, these are 2 very large companies, and a lot of people may think, man, this guy made it. I get this question a lot too. People were talking to me, and they're like, you were a senior post-production editor for NASCAR Productions. You were working on Fox Sports 1, this, that, other thing. Why leave? Why would you, a lot of people would have taken that offer from Paramount, is what I'm trying to get at, just because of the word Paramount.
Right. There is a parallel universe where I stayed at Paramount, where I stayed at Technicolor. And here's exactly why I left. This is going to sound so random and fantastical, and it absolutely is just a completely different chapter of my life. But I was at business school, wrapping up the end of the degree, when one of our last classes was business plan development, where we went and found a company and we built a business plan around it, like a go-to-market strategy.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine from Technicolor actually came to me and said, hey, I am making very expensive headphones out of a garage in Orange County. And it's insane. We can't make them fast enough. And we think that there's a market for like super high-end headphones. And this is like right around the Beats sale time frame.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, let me take this business and run it through business plan development. And so we built their first business plan, their first set of financials, their first like overarching marketing plan. And it was done with a team of like 5 MBAs as like a part of a quasi capstone project. So I gave the business plan back. I got an A in the class. It was lovely. They walked away with their first like set of financials and modeling. And then a couple months later, like right as I was graduating, they got a phone call, and he said, from my friend again, and he said, hey, we got a call from Atlantic Records. They want us to fly to New York City and basically pitch the company. The company's name is Odyssey.
Yeah.
Can you go ahead and get on a plane on Friday and go do that? We really need you to raise some money for us. You can do that, right? And I'm like, oh, absolutely, I can do that. I hang the phone up and I'm like, what did I just sign up to do? This is crazy. Over the next 5 days, I worked on a pitch for Atlantic Records, asking them for $4.5 million to essentially start moving this company into more of a commercial project. When I say these are expensive headphones, they started at $1,000 and they went up from there, and we literally could not make them fast enough.
I looked at their website now. Yeah, their headphones are like, they're in the gaming headphones now, and they do make a $300 gaming headphone on the low end.
Yes,
but their headphones go all the way up to $4,000.
That is correct.
High quality control process. I looked at the quality control process that was as part of my research for this interview. Is crazy.
This was all part of my pitch to a very, and that was a real interesting experience unto its own, coming up with the value proposition for why should you invest in a garage based headphone startup in Southern California. And the reason why they were interested is because while TV has evolved from standard def to high def, 4K and beyond, the audio world has actually gone in reverse. The audio has gone from pristine recordings down to streaming music that you're hearing through garbage headphones, and you don't know any better. So you don't know what high definition audio actually truly sounds like.
Yeah.
And the whole point of the investment was help us stop making $1,000 headphones, help us start making $300 headphones. It takes a lot of marketing to break into that world. And the idea was that Warner Music Group, the owner of Atlantic Records, and all of its resources could help us do exactly that. So I fly to New York. I'm meeting the CEO of Atlantic Records. I'm meeting the parent company that owns both of Warner Music Group and Atlantic Records. And that CEO of Atlantic Records grabs me and he says, hey, so you're the guy doing the pitch today. This is the first time I'm meeting my boss. So if you mess this up, I will absolutely end you. Do you understand me? And this is my first introduction to this individual.
Oh my God.
and I was literally going on in 1 minute, and the room filled with like these executives. And I'm like, oh, dear Lord, what have I got myself into?
You went from like making little animations for Technicolor or making little videos for to this. That's incredible.
Yeah. And also Technicolor thinks I am sick and not having called in sick and flown to New York City to pitch this.
Oh my God.
So I pitch it. Halfway through the pitch, the boss, who I was not supposed to screw up in front of, gets up and leaves the room. Now, I have never done any high stakes pitches of this level before, but I'm pretty sure this is a bad sign for how the pitch is going. He walks out of the room. He comes back in. He's now eating an apple, kind of obnoxiously loud. And he says, Mark, stop. And I'm like, oh, I was just getting to the good part. And he says, I love it. We're doing it. You're going to work with this person here and this person here, and welcome to the Warner Music family. And I'm like, wait, just so that I can understand, I just asked you $4.5 million and you said you're giving me $4.5 million? And he's like, that's right. I got to go. Bye. And he leaves. And
oh, wow. How much of a stake was that for that $4 million?
So I actually lecture at UCLA from, this is the beginning of, basically, it just gave you the beginning of the story. Okay. The lecture UCLA is all the things that unfolded between that meeting, getting the money 18 months later, and then joining, starting this company and then leaving the company at a very early part of it. Again, it feels like a different life, different time, but there was a lot of back and forth about this ownership stake, and the bulk of that 18 months was fighting back to maintaining control of the company.
Yeah.
And $4.5 million 18 months later is not as much money as you would have asked for had you known it was going to take 18 months.
Sure.
So during that process, I did leave Technicolor because my 9 to 5 had a 5 to 9 attached to it at the end, and I had to reverse those.
Yeah.
And so it was really cool to actually leave Technicolor saying, I've been moonlighting for quite a long time now, and I'm done here, I'm going to go move on to Odyssey. And I got a lot of support from people doing that were, excited to see this kind of like this project kind of unfold and this opportunity open up. So that is why I left the Technicolor world. And I went into this company to do like whatever like business school person dreams of.
Yeah.
Maybe it's potentially like starting your own business and getting it funded. And that's actually never why I went to UCLA to begin with. I wanted to move up the ladder inside of entertainment, be a marketing head someday at a Paramount, et cetera, which is absolutely not how that process is done. But that's what I thought when I first started going to business school. And I just knew that I had missed a lot of business acumen that my colleagues had that were never in the military to begin with. So that was kind of the impetus for why I went. I was able to use the GI Bill. That was terrific.
Yeah.
And then I never dreamed of like starting a company like that ever. It was truly an amazing experience and one that kind of catapulted me into a different direction. So I actually left that company in 2014 after the job stopped being any bit of fun and was just everyday nonstop fighting. And it was just the opposite of the American dream. It's now in the very capable hands of Shankar, who is doing an incredible job, and we still very much stay in touch. But it just wasn't the right fit for me. I had left the military to do something in entertainment, and I wanted to go back into that. And that's when I happened to cross David Gale at We Are the Mighty.
Yeah. What brought you out of? So you were looking for a way out as far as from business development and that sort of thing. And how did it go back to telling military stories?
So David Gale, who had spent 18 years inside of the Viacom beast, most of the last of the late part of those years was running MTV Films. And David was responsible for, I think, 28 films. And these are the national treasures that are Beavis and Butthead Do America, all the Jackass movies, Pootie Tang, Napoleon Dynamite, Kings of Comedy, like an Election and Varsity Blues.
Wow.
It's like the halcyon of those MTV movie days that have come and gone. And while David was there, he had a big target on his back because everyone wanted to be the head of MTV Films. They were having such like runaway success because MTV, the channel, was curating and providing an audience to market to at a fraction of the cost that any other studio had to release a film. They had the inside track on it. You want people to go see Napoleon Dynamite? Put Napoleon Dynamite on TRL. It was as simple as that. Do we think people are going to go see a Jackass movie? Well, statistically, we would say that this could transition quite nicely into a movie franchise. So David saw this and he started getting content sent to him by friends that were like, hey, can you get this military veteran band on MTV? And David's response would be, you haven't seen MTV in the last 10 years. We stopped doing the whole music video thing a long time ago.
Thank you, Teen Mom. Anyways.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. No, it's just Jersey Shore and Teen Mom. Both quality programming, but much different than the original.
Yeah.
But this is interesting that the military is like creating content creators and storytellers. And so David saw this opportunity to create a brand wrapper for the military community. And in 2014, he set out to create We Are the Mighty. And I got a chance to meet with him. I had just left Odyssey. I was trying to figure out, okay, I'm now painted with the consumer electronics brush and no longer the entertainment background. So I was really like, and I was getting that as feedback. Like I'd go for a job interview at like Fox and they're like, you sell headphones. What are you going to do here? I'm like, no, I don't. I have a very long background in the entertainment industry, and they didn't want to hear it. So I got a chance to meet David, and David wanted to hire me as a video, basically a low level video producer. And I said, David, I love what you're doing, but I think that I will not best serve you as a video producer. I haven't done that since Combat Camera. And although I'm positive I could pick it back up and do an excellent job with it, you are never going to meet a veteran with combat experience in basically photojournalism, who's deployed, who has gone through the entertainment industry on both the studio side and the post-production side, who has gone to business school, has gone into a startup experience, raising money and getting it. I'm a little bit like a unicorn for you. I can do more than be a video producer. And he and I like parted ways. And 2 months later, he called me back and he said, essentially, like, I want you to help me run the company. And it
Strong.
was great. Yeah. I'm shocked that I was that ballsy in that interview to basically turn down a job, tell them what I needed to really be doing instead, and essentially convert that to what was kind of essentially the COO role in the very beginning of the company. So I was there when it started on day one, essentially.
Wow.
When we flipped the switch to start wearethemighty.com, that was November 11th, 2014.
Very good. Now you've been the third veteran from We Are the Mighty that I've spoken with. Blake Stillwell, of course, my old TA, and David Tenenbaum being the other two. Great interviews in our archive. If you get a chance, go check them out. Again, all airmen. Were they there at the beginning as well?
So I called Blake and said, "Bro, I know you're working for the Near East project right now, and I'm sure you love it. We have an opportunity to really start building, creating stories and content around the military community, and I want you to do this with me." And he left his job. He flew out here. And so he came in probably a year into it. He came in, I think, in 2015.
Gotcha.
And I listened to Blake's interview with you. He, was and still is one of our most like prolific writers. He helped us set and define the tone. And you use this kind of BuzzFeed meets the military. That's the same analogy I've used for the longest time to be able to kind of explain what We Are the Mighty is.
Oh, wow.
He helped us with a lot of that content in the very beginning. David Tenenbaum came in I think 2017 timeframe when we were expanding sales team, and he was brought in to help us kind of help coordinate more on like the VSO side and to be a support for that sales machine that we were ginning up at the time.
Yeah.
To keep the lights on. So they were there in the early years, but the company has changed quite a bit in the almost 6 years it's been in operation at this point.
It seems like there's almost a different focus almost every year. There's a lot of people in this space, like Task and Purpose. Now Coffee or Die is coming on. I see, some focus on short form, some focus on long form. Now it seems like you guys kind of very broad in terms of media. You do short form, long form, blogging, some articles, blogs that aren't necessarily military centric or veteran centric, but are topics that veterans take an interest in, like certain films or sports or what have you. You produce television docuseries, YouTube content. Blake had a podcast at one point, all kinds of stuff. For you, what is the status of the military media community industry going into 2021?
Yeah, it has been a wild ride over the last 6 years for sure. And you're right to notice that there are a lot of content providers in the space, and that's actually a good thing. That actually demonstrates to the rest of the world that there is an audience to serve.
Absolutely.
And each one of us do this in a different way. Military.com is more of a resource-based entity that serves news.
Yep.
Task and Purpose is, slightly left-leaning news organization that does parallel us.
More journalism.
In some times to come, but more journalism,
more
right?
Yeah. Military Times is kind of like our legacy tabloid, right?
Right.
Yeah.
and Coffee or Die is doing like really cool, more longer form journalism as well, and they've got some incredibly talented individuals over there. We serve the community in sort of this like socially driven micro content, and we'll touch on trending news, but we're not the entity that is going to be breaking news. So if you find yourself looking for breaking news on wearethemighty.com, you have found yourself on the wrong publisher.
Yes.
But we were started as an entity and in our DNA as an entertainment focused company that is that's charter was to identify content that we could level up into longer form, into TV and film, and then to be able to use our We're the Mighty's social media and the website as basically what if it's analogous back to MTV, the MTV channel to the MTV films. But the world has changed quite a bit during this time frame, and the publishing world is one that's extremely challenging to survive and then to even thrive in.
Yeah.
So we have irons in a couple different fires and have refocused over the years. But we have gotten to the point where we have a tiny toehold in in Hollywood with the creation of that series that we finished called 10 Weeks, and with a movie that we sold to the company that basically does all the John Wick films called Thunder Road, and so we have a movie script out there, so a movie potentially happening someday, and then that other show, 10 Weeks, was an incredible collaboration with the United States Army and a production company called Blumhouse that does a lot of horror predominantly for Universal. They did the Purges and Get Out and things of that nature. And the now defunct Quibi is who paid for all of it. We were actually supposed to launch on November 9th, the 10-week series. But if you've seen the news in the last couple of days, they're going to shutter the service.
Yes,
which is disappointing to not get the show put out on that platform, but could potentially have a silver lining because it is a good show, and we could potentially find a different distribution partner out there. And we're going to start that process with Blumhouse, assuming that Quibi doesn't find a home for it.
It's back in. Okay, so Quibi still kind of owns it right now, but it could potentially come back into the ether.
It could. And signs are kind of pointing to that direction right now, but time will tell what happens. So it was an opportunity for us to follow 5 new recruits from the beginning to the end of the 10 weeks of Army boot camp. And because we're following 5 unique individuals, we see sort of like American Idol, we see some of the background behind these individuals, their drive and focus, and then their challenges inside of boot camp as they go through that whole process of Army combat training. So it's a really cool look for anyone who's interested in what traditional boot camp looks like, and it's a way for even people like myself who went through my own Air Force version of that. I don't know what the Army process looks like. I've always been fascinated to understand that myself. We think we've got a little something for everyone there, and the Army sees it as an opportunity to be able to showcase to younger individuals what that is, and to maybe demystify it to a degree and make it a little bit more accessible. So it's a kind of a recruiting endeavor for them.
So you got some support from the service as well?
We did. The Army was incredible. One of my team members, Chase Millsap, was able to help coordinate all of this between the different production entities and then in the Army itself, to the point where we had, I'm not kidding, we had a 3-star general call the office and say, "Hey, this is Jim from the Army, not this is Lieutenant General." Exactly. Yeah. And like, I need to talk to Chase and get Chase on the phone. And he's like, "I hear you're trying to make a show about boot camp. Let's do this." And there were a lot of other things that had to happen in between all this, including a Medal of Honor recipient going to bat for us.
Oh, wow.
A whole bunch of things. That was Colonel Jack Jacob. All incredibly helpful in the flywheel that got us into the actual end of the production. So it was incredible to watch the Army actually move very quickly on giving us carte blanche access there, and then their ability to kind of help us create the story to tell it the right way.
It sounds like you're really close to your goal, taking that micro content that was on blogs and YouTube, and now you're actually being able to put that together to fund larger content like what you're doing. That's outstanding. Is there a revenue stream that maybe I'm not thinking of when it comes to content creation? We talk about web ad revenue, organic platform show ad revenue, selling shows, YouTube ads. Of course, YouTube ads before were probably good before they changed up the way they paid out. What am I not thinking of as a way to make money off content?
You are thinking of, I would imagine, all of it, and all of it is so hard to justify the cost of creating and then to monetize. the way the company keeps the lights on is through advertising and branded content, helping connect companies to the military in an authentic way as possible. So we primarily live off of that advertising revenue, and it's a lot of how can we optimize the amount of content we're creating versus the amount of money or revenue that it generates. And so moving into TV and film is something that's extremely hard to do because we don't have the types of development budgets that a studio could potentially deploy on creating a good idea.
Yeah.
So it's really as scrappy as we can get. That is something that if lightning strikes, and we've had just enough success that we can see bigger projects on the horizon.
Yeah.
It's still something that we very much have to like look in the mirror every day to make decisions on, continuing to pursue. But we've got some incredibly talented individuals, and we've got some great ideas. So we are still we're still full steam ahead on this.
You've dealt with a lot of content for the past 6 years. What content do you see out in our military community now that you think our audience responds to or engages with the most?
You see what the Black Rifle Coffee guys and gals have been able to do, and they really have incredible personalities behind the content that they create to sell that brand so effectively and so well.
Yeah.
The community really cottons on to the brashness of some of that type of marketing. It's incredibly well done. It's very funny, very purpose driven, and it's the type of irreverence that the community really likes. Vet TV has their own niche that they've carved out of the very bordering R NC-17 rated version of
very dark
military. Yeah, very veteran humor. My company, I have said this kind of before, tongue in cheek, we're kind of like the Disney of the military community with respect to we don't lean into we don't lean into politics at all. We don't lean into the part of the world that would make it's the kind of stuff that you would be proud to show your mom and dad on any level, and it doesn't resonate with with everyone. It is, you've identified this we're more of like a broad subset of the content that people consume. So we're doing like military history, listicles and articles about our heroes, weapon systems, etc. We're basically kind of generating the content that is for kind of everyday connection to the military community, and that's predominantly our focus, and that's what kind of allows us to operate into different like shows and things of that nature. We had one show that kind of was like the only thing that kind of bordered into that world, which is dumb military questions. That's where civilians ask us dumb questions about the military, and we tear them apart for doing so. I really appreciate the news that Task and Purpose is putting out there. That team works incredibly hard and is it has become a real serious entity out in the space. Yeah. And I really like a lot of the digital series we've created that many people don't know about. We have done probably about 12 digital series over the course of these 6 years. And some of it's even branded content for companies, but we've done shows for the purpose of doing shows. We sold 6 to the also defunct Go90 platform that Verizon put out, and so we've got some really cool shows that I'm extremely proud of. That I would love to keep continuing and will continue when we find the right brand partners to be able to produce them.
Gotcha. Very good. With blogs.va.gov, with Vantage Point, we really, our strategy pretty much is to be the lead news on veterans issues and veterans information. And we really appreciate the fact that We're the Mighty syndicates a lot of our information because it's government funded. So it's open to anybody can share it. But we really do appreciate that you guys do that.
Absolutely. And we will continue to do that. It's part of our charter here to help connect the military community to the resources. And the VA is an incredibly important part of that. And we're here to help you get get the news out as well. Your podcast is absolutely incredible, and it's shocking and also not shocking, how well it's doing and the people you're getting connected to and the people you're able to highlight out there. So this would also be another piece of content that is super important. I'm glad the VA is allowing this to happen in the beginning and is able to give you a platform as well to reach so many people. And it's incredible work that I hope to see continue into perpetuity.
That's a big endorsement. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. What is one thing that you learned during your time in the military that you apply to what you do today?
I think that there's two things. One thing I didn't do as much that I wish I did, and the other thing that I do all the time now, probably to the chagrin of much of my staff. But attention to detail was really drilled into my head in specifically the combat camera time frame. We brought in a commander that showed up right, and he was the first of the traditional communication officers that would then go on to lead the squadron. The ones before that were all from the old guard. They were visual information officers. They were people that had storytelling in their background. And this new guy came in, and he was actually, prior to being the commander, he was a finance guy. And I say that because he was so far removed from any sort of creative process. He came in and he was asking questions from day one about production and about the way storytelling is supposed to happen. He took it upon himself to go through classes, and anytime a video went to him, it was shocking how precisely capable he had become of pulling it apart, finding mistakes, and looking for things that we had to adjust in a positive way from the onset of everything we were doing. And I remember videos coming up to my level that I would have passed in previous time frame because the workload was so much and it was good enough for government work, but he held us to a different level of standard. And it was something that really, I think, was good for the process as a whole, and kind of taught me the value of, if you take the time to do it right the first time, you save yourself a lot of time down the line.
Very good. I don't know. This is kind of the first time I've ever asked this question, but what would, one veteran life hack be that you've learned since getting out that you'd like to share with other veterans that may be in the process of that transition?
Yeah. Maybe this is not a shocking response, but being a veteran admits you to a very special club, for better or worse. And I am always very eager and happy when I learn that someone has donned the uniform or has been in part of the military community in some way, shape, or form. I would say utilize that veteran card to help others that are in this space, that are trying to learn about things. Those organizations out there, like what David Tenenbaum is working on, Heroes Linked, what Veterati had initially set out to do, or what organizations like Veterans in Media and Entertainment are, helping connect people in very specific ways. And I would say, just don't be afraid to reach out and to utilize it, because more often than not, the person on the other side is going to be extremely happy to help or offer advice or to make connections that wouldn't necessarily happen from someone just kind of blindly coming in off the street asking for help, right? It's a way for our community to help itself, help each other. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You'll be surprised at how much help you'll be giving to someone else down the line.